Hello, it's Phillip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Today I'm looking at a book which has come to us from ROUTLEDGE, which is a Taylor and Francis group, from a writer called Ursula Smartt. Ursula and I have been in contact for some time, and we reviewed an earlier edition of her work which is called Media and Entertainment Law. It's this book here, which we'll have a look at. We reviewed the second edition, and a new third edition has come out with an update because there's been quite a lot of interesting things happening since the previous edition. As I've indicated, the reviews we've written have appeared in the journals, and they've also been posted on the internet, on the websites, so there's plenty for you to read about this particular book. Elizabeth and I talked about the book, and Elizabeth has in fact produced part of this excellent review, and the title we've given our review is the following: The Classic Legal Text for Media Professionals and Their Advisors, now in a new edition with a foreword by KEIR STARMER, and I'll move on to that in a moment. Let me show you the book first of all, because it's a student book primarily. There it is, a paperback. There we go, you can see it's a paperback. That's the front of it. Then you can see the spine, and then you can see there's an awful lot of stuff. If I just bring it into the camera a bit closer, you can see there's a lot of information about the book on the back, a lot of detail, and you can see the information about ROUTLEDGE at the bottom. It runs to something approaching 470 odd pages, and if I start at the back, you can see there is an index which is by page numbering, and after that you've got a detailed bibliography at the back. There's a lot of cross-referencing here, so the bibliography is in fact a very detailed one, and then after that you've got the actual text itself. You've got quite a lot of various teaching aids that go into it. It is paragraph numbered, and you've got footnoting at the bottom. Now, there we go, we've got the actual book there, and there's a very nice dedication, in fact, for this edition to both Elizabeth and to me from Ursula. Now, there's a nice picture of Ursula. There we go. Make sure that you see the picture of her there. Then there is the front cover. And then after that, we have the blurb about the book itself. It's available basically as a paperback, a hardback, and also as an ebook. Then you've got the content section. You can see that it's coloured for the title blue, and then the paragraph numbering. And you see there are a total of 9 chapters. Then you have the bibliography. There's also internet sources and useful websites given at the back. Then there's a short, very important foreword written by Sir KEIR STARMER, Queen's Counsel MP, Member of Parliament for Holborn and St Pancras, currently the Shadow Brexit Secretary. There is a preface to the book. Do read KEIR's statement because it's important. I think he puts it into quite useful perspective, and that's the actual preface there, dated February 2017. Then there are acknowledgements of all the people who've been involved in helping Ursula write this book. Ursula is in fact, it says here, she is a researcher and visiting lecturer in media and entertainment law at the University of Surrey in Guildford. Lectures in law at New College of the Humanities in London. Now you've got here a glossary of acronyms, etc. Very useful in this area. You can see it's quite a substantial list. The glossary, it runs through for quite a bit. It's alphabetic. Then after that you've got the table of cases. And then after that the legislation, of course. And to follow that, you've got statutory instruments immediately following. You can see it there. It's listed in legislation, but it's actually statutory instruments there. Then you've got international instruments and treaties. You are actually getting a lot of this international stuff, if I can put it that way, in these books at the moment. Excuse me, including, of course, European Union directives, which are listed there, which are still important, irrespective of Britain's departure from the European Union. Then we get into the chapter headings. You see each chapter very usefully has a short, basically a short index, so you can see exactly what you've got. And you start off with, again, key points and an overview. So it's very much a student's friend. And it runs all the way through like that. There's a huge amount of detail, which you can look at here. And you have things, for instance, like key case law. Now, as someone who hasn't really picked up that many textbooks for some time, it's always refreshing to have a look at these textbooks, because it's amazing how many new cases come along which one doesn't spot in the Times Law Reports or wherever. So it is useful to actually just have a look at these books from time to time to just basically update yourself as to what the law is. Now, what do we say about the book? Well, this is what Elizabeth and I have come up with. We say it's not surprising that this thorough and thoroughly informative and entertaining legal text has now gone through 3 editions since the first one came out in 2011. And in this relatively short space of time, the internet has become the major media influence. No question about that. It's ubiquitous, influential, international, almost universally accessible, and unlike other media, almost completely unregulated. And there is the problem. Even as I speak, in the autumn of 2017, we have countries begging the social media sites and certain organisations to be more perhaps transparent and to be more helpful, and the answer is always no. And it's even worse when it comes to litigation. As many of you who may have come across case law and may have heard how difficult it is to nail some of these people down, get them to court and try and sort some of the problems out. So it's an area which is fruitful certainly for academic discussion, it's fruitful for practitioners, and it's going to be very much a 21st century legal substantive area in its own right. And that's really why I think Ursula is producing work of this substance, which is first class. She says, internet law, she says, is covered to a much greater extent in this new 3rd edition, with a stronger focus on regulators of the media, communications and advertising industries. Not surprising, because a few things have happened since the last edition came out. And as I've indicated, Sir Keir Starmer, QCMP, comments in the foreword, the way we communicate has changed profoundly in the last decade. Social media provides a new worldwide platform for everyone. He's absolutely right, and that was shown in the general election in June 2017, when in fact people had underestimated the power of social media, especially amongst the younger generation, the younger voter. So you can see immediately why KEIR is quite keen on it, and why it's actually more important than some people might realise. Going back to the review, referring further to that massive sledgehammer to crack a nut called the Leveson Inquiry, Starmer declares that it shone a bright torch on murky practices, specifically in the British press. Not as murky, one might add, as the lamentably irresponsible attitude on the part of what the same press has called the internet giants, and we know who they are, with blood on their hands. And I say that bearing in mind we've had a whole series of atrocities, even as I have produced this presentation in London itself, and I've no doubt we are going to have more. So therefore it's important to realise that when we say they've got blood on their hands, we mean it, because obviously there are serious problems about obtaining encrypted information. Not rather detailed for this review, but you can see the fact that this is a subject that's not going to go away. Let me continue anyway. Following the spate of these terrorist atrocities in London, I therefore think it's fair comment when, in the name of free speech, said internet giants consistently dream up inventive excuses for not taking down user-generated content which variously features hate campaigns, bomb-making instructions, death threats, graphic images of child abuse, and a long list of other horrors. And you can see why the emphasis is shifting more towards regulation. But of course there's a problem, and it's international. Now, as the author goes on to say, online communication is no longer constrained by legal boundaries. The book's 2nd and 3rd chapters, for example, provide learned and informed comment on, respectively, media freedom and freedom of expression, followed by an examination of technology and the media. The key questions cited are: how, if at all, can social media be regulated in cyberspace? How and how far can freedom of expression be permitted on the internet? Because you've got the problem of freedom versus privacy, which are the two elements of the Human Rights Act, which have caused a lot of grief for quite a few politicians. And of course, an interesting irony emerges here, because from print to film and broadcast, the older media, including advertising, must necessarily abide by various forms and degrees of regulation, employing legal advisors, night lawyers and so forth, to help them do it. Of course, the internet, comparatively speaking, isn't regulated at all. There's a little element to a certain extent of self-regulation, but it's minimal. The book addresses these and a host of other issues pertaining to media law, from regulatory authorities to confidentiality and privacy, very important areas, of course, for litigation, to defamation, again important for all sorts of reasons, intellectual property, IP, entertainment law, and much, much more. And of course, I think the important thing to do is we're not talking about party politics here at all. We're talking about what the law is and where the problems are, so we can identify it as lawyers, especially if we've got a client coming to us, as I have, who've been very unhappy about infringements of their intellectual property rights and so forth. And of course things like defamation, which one gets on a fairly regular basis, and that of course is a highly specialised area in its own right of the law of tort. The book itself, this one, is, as I say, published by ROUTLEDGE, and it's aimed primarily at students, although its erudition and clarity of presentation, we think, should attract a much wider readership. Each chapter contains key points, an overview and a section on recommended further reading. And key principles throughout are amply supported by reference to legislation and to relevant cases, and including a lot of famous ones that you'll probably know about from reading about them in the press or of course online, involving people like celebrities and all sorts of other factors which are very much part of modern culture. Also, it's important to note in the book that there are useful lists and tables of cases, legislation, international instruments and treaties. And again, as I've said before, that is an area where we are going to have to start building, irrespective of Brexit and whatever happens. This is a separate issue, and we are going to have to start looking very much at new treaties in the next couple of decades, certainly, if we're going to get anywhere near to trying to control the problems. The difficulty is we know the countries who are responsible, and I have to say most of them are what we would describe possibly as rogue states, where we're going to have very little enforcement in any event. So there are problems which we have to look at, but that is a political and a diplomatic issue rather than a legal one. And of course, there's very, very usefully, which I've indicated at the front, is there's the glossary of acronyms and legal terms, which I found a boon, because I don't understand some of these terms, and a lot of people don't either. They might think they do, so it's very useful to have that. Thank you for that, Ursula. Now let me conclude by saying it's a dynamic and fast-moving area of law without any question, which means that this important and certainly readable book should inevitably attract the interest of media lawyers, not to mention, dare we say, a motley throng of advertising folk and journalists. And I would point out that the publication date is cited as at 2017. It was produced in the earlier part of the year, and I'm recording this in the late summer, effectively. That's when we wrote the review. Let me have a look at the book again. It's an interesting point. A picture on the front of two people looking, I don't know whether it's at television or what it is. It's more likely that they're looking at the internet rather than TV. However, that's an important point. There's the front, there's the spine, and then, as I say, there's a lot of stuff on the back, some quotes from eminent people about the book itself and so on. And then if we just open it in the middle, protecting journalistic sources, plebgate and police phone hacking. You see, there we go. Very topical, very important, and it can bring down cabinet ministers. It can cause all sorts of problems. You see, you've got some very useful listings there, as well as to try to how to find things. You've got a lot of footnoting. There is the paragraph numbering, and you can see how the actual book runs through, because the arrows indicate where you can lead on to further reading. Can I just remind you again, right at the back, that you've got a very useful bibliography which again I found helpful. I don't know how many hours Ursula put into this, but it must have been a lot because there's a huge amount of work that's gone in. Thank you very much to her for the new edition. As I've said to her, in fact, in email correspondence, I would not be at all surprised if there's another edition before too long. So you've got a lot of work to do, Ursula, but thank you for doing this particular edition, and I'm sure all the students reading it will find it a very beneficial area because it is an important new area for practice. And if you are going to practice as I do, you will find you get clients coming with problems directly related to what is called media and entertainment law. So thank you very much to all concerned for producing this excellent book. Bye-bye.